The gunshot echoed through the dusty main street of Silver Creek, silencing every conversation and stopping every passerby in their tracks. Rose Summers flinched but held her ground, watching as the tall stranger holstered his revolver after shooting a rattlesnake that had slithered too close to her skirts. It was 1875, and the Wyoming Territory was as untamed as the man standing before her. "You should be more careful, madam," he said, his voice deep and gravelly from years of hard living. "These parts ain't forgiving to the unprepared." Rose straightened her spine, adjusting the small valise in her grip. "I appreciate your intervention, sir, but I assure you I'm quite capable of managing." She was lying, of course. 3 days in Silver Creek had taught her that city sensibilities from Boston meant little in this rugged landscape. The man's eyes, blue as a cloudless sky and just as distant, studied her from beneath the brim of a well-worn hat. Xavier. He introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "Most folks just call me Ike." "Rose Summers," she replied, extending a gloved hand that looked pristine against his sun-weathered skin when he took it. "I've recently arrived to take over my late uncle's apothecary shop." A flash of recognition crossed his face. "Old Doc Summers was your kin? Didn't know he had family back east." "He and my father were estranged," Rose explained, not adding that her own father's recent passing had left her with few options beyond accepting this inheritance. At 26, unmarried and facing destitution in Boston after her father's debts were settled, Silver Creek represented both her last hope and a fresh start. Ike nodded, then glanced down the street. "That shop's been closed for months. Likely needs a good deal of work." "I'm not afraid of work, Mr. Xavier." He looked at her delicate hands, her fine dress already gathering dust at the hem, and the determination in her green eyes. Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. "Even so, a woman alone in these parts draws attention. Not all of it welcome." "I'm quite aware," Rose replied, thinking of the unwanted advances she'd already deflected at the hotel where she was temporarily staying. "But I didn't travel 2,000 miles to be deterred by difficulty." Ike studied her a moment longer, then asked, "You have protection, Miss Summers?" She hesitated. "I have my wits." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Might recommend something that shoots as well." He glanced at the sun climbing higher. "I'd best be on my way. Town's not exactly welcoming to my kind." For the first time, Rose noticed how the townspeople gave him a wide berth, mothers pulling children closer, men watching with wary eyes. "And what kind is that, Mr. Xavier?" His expression hardened. "The dangerous kind, Miss Summers. Best remember that." Before she could respond, he mounted a magnificent black stallion and rode off, leaving Rose to wonder what demons haunted a man whose first action upon meeting her had been to save her from harm. The apothecary shop was indeed in dire condition. Dust covered every surface. Shelves stood empty where once medicines and tinctures had been neatly arranged, and the living quarters behind the shop were Spartan at best. But there was possibility here, possibility Rose desperately needed. She spent the first week cleaning, organizing, and taking inventory of what little remained. Word spread quickly that Doc Summers' niece had arrived to reopen the shop, and curiosity brought a steady stream of visitors, though few had ailments requiring treatment. "You're the doc's girl from back east," stated a weathered woman who introduced herself as Martha Jenkins. "Got any remedies for rheumatism? My hands ain't been right since last winter." "I'm not a doctor," Rose admitted, "but I assisted my father in his medical practice for years. I believe I can help." Martha looked skeptical but allowed Rose to examine her hands. "Your uncle saved my Samuel when the influenza came through. Good man, even if he kept to himself." "I wish I'd known him better," Rose confessed, mixing a salve of arnica and willow bark. "We only corresponded by letter." "He was proud as punch when you started writing to him," Martha said, surprising Rose. "Showed me your letters once, all full of medical questions. Said you had a healer's heart, just needed to find your way to it." Something warm bloomed in Rose's chest at this connection to an uncle she'd never met in person. "I hope to honor his memory by serving this community." Martha nodded approvingly. "You'll need supplies. The mercantile's got some basics, but for proper medicines, you'll need to order from Cheyenne." "Yes, I've written already, but it will be weeks before." The shop door banged open, startling them both. A young boy of perhaps 12 years stood there, panic written across his face. "Miss Summers? Pa says come quick. It's Jameson, he's been shot." Rose grabbed her medical bag, one of the few possessions she'd brought from Boston, and followed the boy through town to a small ranch just beyond the outskirts. A crowd had gathered outside a modest cabin, voices raised in anger. "Hang the bastards," someone shouted. "Take it to the Xavier spread," called another. Rose pushed through the throng to find a middle-aged man lying on a blood-soaked blanket, his wife pressing cloths to a wound in his shoulder. "I'm Rose Summers," she announced, kneeling beside the injured man. "I have medical training." The woman looked up with tear-streaked cheeks. "They shot Thomas when he caught them rustling our cattle. Said they'd kill him next time." Rose examined the wound. The bullet had passed through, which was fortunate, but infection was the real danger now. "I need clean water, boiled if possible, and whiskey if you have it." As she worked to clean and stitch the wound, she listened to the angry conversations around her. Apparently, cattle rustling had become increasingly common, and suspicion had fallen heavily on the Xavier ranch, run by Isaiah Xavier and his younger brother Jacob. "Those Xaviers have always been trouble," an older man proclaimed. "Their daddy was a no-good drifter who married that Cherokee woman. Apple doesn't fall far from the tree." Rose's hands faltered momentarily. Isaiah Xavier was half Cherokee. It explained the wary looks, the distance people kept. Even in 1875, such prejudices ran deep in frontier towns. When she'd stabilized Thomas Jameson and given his wife instructions for his care, Rose prepared to leave. A tall man with a sheriff's badge stepped into her path. "Miss Summers?" "Sheriff Dalton. Appreciate your help here today." "I was merely doing my duty," she replied. "Mr. Jameson should recover if infection doesn't set in." The sheriff nodded. "Folks are saying you've been seen speaking with Isaiah Xavier." Rose stiffened. "He killed a rattlesnake that might have bitten me." I thanked him. "Is that a crime in Silver Creek?" "No crime. Just a warning. The Xaviers keep to themselves for good reason. Isaiah spent 3 years in Yuma prison for killing a man. Claims it was self-defense, but..." The sheriff shrugged. "Just be careful. Town's taken a shine to you already. Would hate to see that change because of unsavory associations." Rose's chin lifted. "I intend to treat anyone who requires medical assistance, Sheriff. I'll not turn away the sick or injured based on gossip or prejudice." The sheriff's expression hardened. "It's not prejudice when it's fact, Miss Summers. Isaiah Xavier is dangerous. You'd do well to remember that." As Rose made her way back to town, she mulled over this new information. A convicted killer, a half-Cherokee man in a town that clearly held racial biases, a cattle rustling operation. Isaiah Xavier was indeed surrounded by trouble, yet she couldn't reconcile the man who'd unhesitatingly saved her from a snake with the hardened criminal the sheriff described. 3 days later, as Rose was closing the shop for the evening, a soft knocking came at the back door. She opened it cautiously to find a young man supporting an older one, both bearing Xavier's striking features, though the younger had darker skin and eyes. "Miss Summers," the younger man said, "I'm Jacob Xavier. My father needs help, and we can't go to town." Rose glanced at the older man, whose face was contorted with pain. Without hesitation, she ushered them inside, helping to ease the elder Xavier onto her examination table. "What happened?" she asked, already assessing the angry red swelling on his arm. "Snakebite," Jacob explained. 2 days ago. He said it wasn't bad, but..." 2 days, Rose exclaimed, examining the wound more closely. "The venom has had ample time to spread." The older Xavier, whose name she learned was Joseph, grimaced. "Couldn't risk coming to town. Not with things as they are." Rose worked quickly, cleaning the wound and applying a poultice to draw out what poison remained. "You should have sought help immediately. Folks in Silver Creek aren't exactly welcoming to Indians," Joseph said weakly. "Even half-breeds married to one." Rose met his gaze. "I treat patients, Mr. Xavier, not rumors or prejudices." She gave Jacob instructions for his father's care and medicines to take home. As they prepared to leave through the back door, Jacob paused. "Isaiah doesn't know we came. He wouldn't approve." "Your brother strikes me as a proud man," Rose observed. "Proud and stubborn," Jacob agreed with a faint smile. "But a good man, despite what people say." Rose found herself thinking about the Xavier family long after they'd gone, wondering about the circumstances that had led Isaiah to prison, about the prejudices that kept them isolated, about the rustling accusations that threatened to ignite violence. Her opportunity to learn more came unexpectedly a week later when Isaiah himself appeared at her shop just before closing. His imposing figure filled the doorway, hat in hand, revealing dark hair touched with silver at the temples despite his apparent age of early 30s. "Miss Summers," he greeted her formally. "I came to thank you for helping my father." "You're welcome, though it seems your brother wished to keep your visit a secret." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "Jacob's protective. He thinks I'm too quick to anger when it comes to family." "Are you?" Rose asked boldly. Those blue eyes assessed her with surprising frankness. "When necessary. This town's been waiting 15 years for me to prove I'm as savage as they believe." "The sheriff mentioned Yuma prison," Rose said, deciding directness was best. Isaiah's expression hardened. "Did he mention the man I killed was dragging a Cherokee woman behind his horse? Or that she was my 16-year-old cousin? Or that the jury that convicted me had 3 of his drinking buddies on it?" Rose's breath caught. "No, he omitted those details. Most do." Isaiah moved to leave, then hesitated. "You should be careful, Miss Summers. Helping my family won't endear you to Silver Creek." "I'm not here to be endeared," Rose replied. "I'm here to heal." Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "Even so, I'm not a man people associate with safely." "Because you're dangerous?" she asked, remembering the sheriff's warning. "I'm dangerous to those who threaten what's mine," he agreed, his voice low. "And this town's been looking for a reason to run us off our land since before my father homesteaded it." "The rustling accusations?" His expression darkened. "Convenient, aren't they? Cattle disappearing from ranches that conveniently border our property. No witnesses except those who claim to have seen Indian thieves in the dark. You believe you're being framed. I know we are." He settled his hat back on his head. "But proving it is another matter." As he turned to go, Rose found herself saying, "Mr. Xavier? I'm hosting a small gathering tomorrow evening, just a few townspeople who've been kind during my settlement here. Perhaps you might attend." Surprise registered briefly on his face before he shook his head. "As I said, Miss Summers, I'm dangerous to know in this town." Rose found herself smiling, the boldness of her next words surprising even her. "Then I'll risk it for the sake of making my own judgments, Mr. Xavier." Something warm kindled in his eyes, quickly masked. "Your reputation is my own to risk," she finished for him. 7 o'clock, if you're brave enough to face Martha Jenkins' curiosity and Reverend Miller's endless biblical quotations. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You may regret the invitation. I've regretted many things in my life, Mr. Xavier. Extending kindness has never been among them." After he left, Rose wondered at her own audacity. She had indeed invited several townspeople who'd welcomed her: Martha, the Reverend and his wife, the schoolteacher Miss Collins, and the elderly couple who ran the mercantile. Adding Isaiah Xavier to the mix would certainly cause a stir, but Rose had never been one to bow to unfounded prejudice. To her surprise and secret pleasure, Isaiah arrived precisely at 7 the following evening, dressed in clean clothes that, while well worn, had been pressed. He'd brought a small gift: wild honey in a glass jar. "From our hives," he explained as she accepted it. "My mother kept bees. Jacob continues the tradition." The other guests had indeed been shocked by his presence, conversation faltering when he entered. But Rose smoothly integrated him, asking about local flora with medicinal properties, a topic where his knowledge proved extensive. "My mother was a healer among her people," he explained when Martha expressed surprise at his familiarity with herbal remedies. "She taught me to recognize healing plants before I could read." Gradually, the stiffness in the room eased, though it never fully dissipated. When the evening ended, Isaiah was the last to leave. "That was either very brave or very foolish," he told her at the door. "Perhaps a bit of both," Rose admitted. "But necessary. This town needs healing in more ways than one." He studied her face in the lamplight. "You're unlike anyone I've met, Rose Summers." "I'll take that as a compliment, Isaiah Xavier." "Ike," he corrected gently. "My friends call me Ike." "Are we friends then?" she asked, heart quickening inexplicably. "I'm not sure what we are," he replied honestly. "But I'd like to find out, if you're willing to risk your standing in this town." Before she could respond, hoof beats thundered down the street. A rider pulled up sharply before her shop. "Fire!" the man shouted. "At the Xavier place." Sheriffs calling for volunteers. Ike was on his horse in seconds, fear etched into the hard lines of his face. Without thinking, Rose grabbed her medical bag and called out, "Wait, I'm coming with you." He hesitated only a moment before extending his hand and pulling her up behind him. Rose had barely settled her arms around his waist before they were racing through the darkness toward the orange glow on the horizon. The Xavier ranch was modest but well-maintained, with a solid main house, a bunkhouse for the few hired hands they employed, and several outbuildings. One of these, the barn, was fully engulfed in flames when they arrived. Men formed a bucket line from the well, while others worked to prevent the fire from spreading to the house. "Jacob!" Ike shouted as he dismounted. "Pa!" Jacob appeared from the smoky darkness, face streaked with soot. "We're all right." "But the horses!" Ike cursed and ran toward the barn, but Jacob caught his arm. "Too late. We got most out, but lost too. And all the winter hay." Rose set up a makeshift treatment area for minor burns and smoke inhalation, working steadily as men staggered from the firefighting effort. The sheriff arrived with more volunteers, and by dawn, the fire was extinguished, leaving only smoldering ruins where the barn had stood. As the sun rose, the sheriff approached where Ike stood surveying the damage with his father and brother. "Mighty convenient, this fire," the sheriff remarked. "Same night Harrington's prized bull goes missing." Ike's head snapped up. "What are you implying, Dalton?" "Just noting the timing. Burn your own barn to cover the theft? Wouldn't be the first time such a trick was used." "You son of a—" Ike lunged forward, but Jacob and Joseph caught him. "That's enough." Rose intervened, stepping between them. "Sheriff, these men have been fighting a fire all night. Their livelihood lies in ashes. Whatever accusations you have can wait for a proper investigation." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Didn't expect to find you here, Miss Summers. Interesting company you're keeping these days." "I go where I'm needed, Sheriff. Now, unless you're making an arrest, I suggest you either help or leave these men to salvage what they can." After the sheriff departed, promising to look into matters, Rose helped the Xavier family take stock of the damage. The loss was substantial, not just the building and horses, but winter feed for their cattle and valuable equipment. "This was deliberate," Ike said grimly, holding up the remains of a kerosene lamp that had been hung in a place where no lamp belonged. "Someone wanted this barn to burn. The rustling accusations, and now this," Jacob added. "They're trying to run us off." Xavier sank heavily onto a crate. "Maybe we should consider selling. Start fresh somewhere else." "No." Ike's voice was steel. "This is our land. Legally homesteaded, legally maintained. I won't be driven off by cowards who strike in darkness." Rose touched his arm gently. "What can I do to help?" He looked down at her hand on his arm, then met her eyes. "You've done enough. Too much. The town will talk." "Let them," she replied simply. Over the following weeks, Rose found herself increasingly drawn into the Xavier struggle. She helped treat Joseph's recurring respiratory problems from smoke inhalation. She assisted in documenting the family's cattle count to disprove rustling accusations. And she found herself spending more and more time with Ike. They were an unlikely pair, the refined Boston doctor's daughter and the half-Cherokee rancher with a prison record. Yet Rose discovered in Ike a depth of character, intelligence, and quiet dignity that impressed her more than any society gentleman's polished manners ever had. For his part, Ike seemed equally fascinated by her determination, her healing skills, and her willingness to defy convention. They began riding together on Sundays after church, which Ike attended for the first time in years, causing a stir by sitting beside Rose in her usual pew. He showed her hidden places in the surrounding hills, crystal-clear springs, ancient pictographs left by his mother's ancestors, meadows carpeted with wildflowers. "My mother brought me here as a child," he told her one afternoon as they sat beside a small waterfall. "She said water remembers everything it touches and carries those memories to the sea." Her people believed water was sacred that way. "Do you believe that?" Rose asked, watching sunlight dance on the rippling surface. "I believe in what I can see and touch," he replied. "But sometimes—" He trailed off, looking at their reflections in the pool. "Sometimes I think she was right about some things. Water shapes everything it touches, given enough time. Like people shape each other," Rose suggested softly. His eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. "Yes, like that." The moment stretched between them, fraught with possibility, until Ike finally looked away. We should head back. Storm's coming. But as autumn progressed toward winter, it wasn't just weather brewing on the horizon. Tensions in Silver Creek escalated as more cattle disappeared, and fingers pointed increasingly toward the Xavier ranch despite lack of evidence. "It's getting dangerous," Jacob told Rose one day when he came to the apothecary for supplies. "There's talk of vigilante justice. Dalton's not doing much to discourage it. Surely they wouldn't lynch a half-breed convicted killer?" Jacob's laugh was bitter. "You still don't understand what we're dealing with, Rose." That evening, Ike came to her back door after the shop closed, his expression grim. "I need you to stay away from our place for a while." "Why?" she demanded. "Because of the threats?" All the more reason to keep you safe," he interrupted. "I can't protect you and my family if things go bad." "I don't need protection, Ike. I need the truth. What's really happening?" He hesitated, then said, "I've been tracking the real rustlers. Got close enough last night to recognize one Dalton's deputy." Rose gasped. "Are you certain?" "Positive. They're stealing cattle, then blaming us to drive us off our land. The railroad's coming through next year. Our ranch sits on the proposed route. You need to tell someone. The territorial governor, the army. With what proof? My word against the sheriffs? A convicted killer against a lawman?" Ike shook his head. "I need evidence no one can dispute. And then what? Then I end this." His voice hardened. "One way or another." Rose caught his hand. "Promise me you won't do anything reckless." Something softened in his eyes. "Can't promise that. Reckless is riding into town to see you when half the men here would like to see me hanging from a tree." "Why do you then?" she asked softly. His calloused fingers tentatively brushed her cheek. "Because some risks are worth taking." The tension that had been building between them for weeks finally broke. His lips found hers in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened into something that made Rose's heart race and her knees weaken. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Ike rested his forehead against hers. "I'm no good for you, Rose," he whispered. "I'm dangerous in ways you can't imagine." She smiled, cupping his face between her hands. "Then I'll risk it for a kind of safe you'll learn." His eyes questioned her meaning, and she explained, "True safety isn't the absence of danger, Ike. It's being with someone who faces it by your side." He pulled her close again, holding her as if she might vanish. "I don't deserve you." "Deserving has nothing to do with love," she replied simply. The word hung between them, new and fragile and powerful. Ike's arms tightened around her. "Love," he repeated, as if testing how the word felt in his mouth. "Yes," she confirmed. "That's what this is, isn't it?" His answer was another kiss, this one full of promise and desperate longing. But their newfound happiness was short-lived. 2 nights later, shots rang out at the Xavier ranch. Jacob was wounded, and their best breeding bulls were slaughtered in the pasture. "A warning," the sheriff said when he investigated the following day. "From folks tired of your thieving ways. We both know who's behind this, Dalton," Ike growled. "Your deputy and whoever's paying him." "Careful, Xavier. That's close to accusing an officer of the law." "Not close. Direct." Ike stepped forward. "I saw him. And I'm guessing this railroad deal lines your pockets too, doesn't it?" The sheriff's hand moved to his gun. "That's a hanging accusation." Rose, who had come to tend to Jacob's wound, intervened. "Gentlemen, please. This solves nothing." But the confrontation marked a turning point. That night, as Rose prepared to close her shop, 3 masked men burst in, overpowering her before she could scream. "Time to teach Xavier a lesson about meddling where he ain't wanted," one growled as they bound and gagged her. They took her to an abandoned line shack miles from town, leaving her tied to a chair with a single guard. "Don't worry, lady," the man told her, his voice unfamiliar beneath his mask. "We ain't planning to hurt you. Just need Xavier to come looking. When he does." The man drew a finger across his throat. Rose's blood ran cold. They were using her as bait for an ambush. Somehow, she had to escape, had to warn Ike. Her opportunity came when her guard dozed off near dawn. Working frantically, she managed to loosen the ropes on one wrist. When he startled awake, she pretended to still be bound, feigning fear and weakness. "Please," she begged. "I need water." Grumbling, he brought a canteen. As he leaned in to help her drink, she smashed her freed fist into his throat, then grabbed the hunting knife from his belt as he choked and gasped. Within moments, she was free and he was the one bound and gagged. But escaping the lined shack was only the beginning. Rose had no idea where she was, only that she needed to reach Ike before he walked into the trap undoubtedly being laid for him. She stumbled through unfamiliar terrain as the sun rose, trying to orient herself using the distant mountains as a guide. By mid-morning, exhaustion and thirst were taking their toll when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Diving into a thicket, Rose watched as a group of riders passed Dalton and his men, looking grim and determined. They were headed toward the Xavier ranch. Desperation gave her new strength. Rose continued on. Finally spotting a landmark, she recognized a distinctive rock formation Ike had shown her on one of their rides. From there, she knew the way to the ranch. By the time she staggered onto Xavier property, the confrontation was already underway. From her vantage point on a ridge, she could see Dalton and 5 men facing off against Ike, Jacob, and Joseph in the ranch yard. "Where is she, Xavier?" Dalton demanded. "If you've hurt her," Ike began, his voice carrying on the wind. "We haven't touched your woman. But my men will if you don't hand over the deed to this property right now." Rose watched in horror as Ike slowly reached for a paper in his pocket. He was going to surrender, to save her. Without thinking, she began to run down the hill, shouting, "Ike, don't. It's a trap." All heads turned toward her. In the moment of distraction, Dalton drew his gun, aiming at Ike. Rose screamed a warning, but it was Joseph Xavier who moved fastest, stepping in front of his son as the shot rang out. Chaos erupted. Ike drew and fired in one fluid motion, hitting Dalton squarely in the chest. Jacob tackled another deputy as the remaining men scattered for cover. Rose kept running, reaching Joseph just as he collapsed. "No," she gasped, pressing her hands to the wound in his chest. "No, no, no." Joseph's eyes found hers, then Ike's as he knelt beside them. "Keep our land," the older man whispered. "It's your birthright." "Pa, don't talk," Ike urged, gripping his father's hand. "Rose will fix you up." But Rose knew the wound was mortal. Joseph Xavier died minutes later in his son's arms, as gunfire continued to exchange between the remaining attackers and the Xavier brothers. When it was over, Dalton and 1 deputy lay dead. 2 others surrendered, and 1 fled but was captured the next day. With their leader gone, they quickly confessed the plot: how railroad investors had paid Dalton to drive the Xaviers off their land by any means necessary, how they'd orchestrated the rustling and the barn fire, how they'd planned to kill Ike and frame him for Rose's murder. The territorial governor sent investigators who uncovered extensive corruption. Dalton's replacement as sheriff was a former Army officer committed to justice for all citizens, regardless of race. And the railroad was forced to reroute around Xavier land, paying a handsome sum for a narrow right-of-way Ike eventually granted them. Joseph Xavier was buried on a hilltop overlooking the ranch he'd built from nothing, his Cherokee wife's grave beside his. The day after the funeral, Rose found Ike there, staring out at the land that had cost his father's life. "He was proud of this place," Ike said without turning. "Proud to build something that would outlast him." Rose slipped her hand into his. "He saved your life. And I couldn't save his." Ike's voice broke. "Just like I couldn't protect you." "You don't need to protect me," Rose reminded him gently. "We protect each other. That's what love is." He finally looked at her, grief and love mingling in his eyes. "You still want this? A life with me, after everything?" "More than ever," she assured him. "Your father died protecting what he loved most, his family and this land. I want to be part of that family, Ike. I want to build something that outlasts us too." A week later, they were married by Reverend Miller in the Silver Creek Church, with Jacob as best man and Martha Jenkins beaming in the front pew. Many townspeople attended, some out of genuine goodwill and others from curiosity, but all witnessed the unlikely union of the Eastern healer and the half-Cherokee rancher. "You sure about this?" Ike whispered as they prepared to say their vows. "I'm still dangerous, Rose." She smiled up at him, love shining in her eyes. "And I'm still willing to risk it for the kind of safe we'll build together." Their life was never easy. The prejudices that had threatened to destroy the Xaviers didn't disappear overnight. But as the years passed, Rose's healing practice flourished, extending to both town and ranch. Ike and Jacob expanded their cattle operation into one of the most successful in the territory, and the Xavier name gradually became one of respect rather than suspicion. In 1893, when Wyoming achieved statehood, Ike and Rose stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching their 3 children play in the yard that had once seen so much violence. "Did you ever imagine this?" Rose asked, leaning against her husband's solid strength. "That day when you shot a rattlesnake at my feet?" Ike chuckled, his arm tightening around her waist. "Never. I thought you were the most beautiful, stubborn woman I'd ever seen. Also the most likely to get herself killed in this wild country. And now I know you're the bravest." He turned her to face him, his once hard face softened by years of happiness despite the streaks of silver now prominent in his hair. "You risked everything for me, Rose. Your reputation, your safety, and gained everything in return," she finished, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. As the sunset painted the distant mountains in gold and crimson, Rose reflected on their journey from suspicion to respect, from danger to safety, from risk to reward. The cowboy who'd once warned her he was dangerous had indeed taught her a different kind of safety, one built on trust, courage, and unwavering love. The risk, she decided as Ike's arms enfolded her, had been worth every moment.